Nuclear fusion is something quite different from nuclear fission. That's what we're going to find out in today's program. We'll also talk about some nuclear energy applications in medicine and about a new method to preserve foods, irradiation. The electricity we consume is always a result of the transformation of another energy source. Until the middle of the century, most electricity came from huge coal or oil-fed steam machines. Then we learned to use the current of rivers to produce electricity. When they go through dams, currents make turbines turn, and the fast movement of the turbines produces energy. Nuclear energy can also be converted into electricity. Nuclear power stations gather the energy generated by the fission of atomic nuclei. But what scientists hope to achieve is the harnessing of nuclear fusion. Unlike fission, fusion is produced when two atomic nuclei fuse together. It is that type of reaction that produces the sun's energy. Thanks to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, perhaps we will have access to an energy source that is virtually inexhaustible. In 1905, life wasn't easy for Einstein, who was then 26. Isolated, unknown, he was a mere employee in a patent office. And yet shortly after, this genius would create a scientific revolution by juggling various existing theories relating to the atom and light. He came up with his famous theory of relativity and his fundamental equation, E equals mc squared. What does E equals mc squared mean? Well, if we were able to collect all the energy contained in a little ball of lead, weighing 10 grams, for example, it would be possible to make a car travel 250 million kilometers. That is, around the Earth over 6,000 times. Everything on Earth, the rocks, the plants, the animals, ourselves, everything is made up of atoms. All atoms consist of a nucleus and electrons. The electrons gravitate around the nucleus, a little like the planets gravitate around the sun. The nucleus, in which almost the entire mass of the atom is concentrated, is made up of little beads or tiny balls called nuclear particles, which are massed together. These are the protons and neutrons. A powerful force of attraction keeps them close together. It is nuclear force. What happens if the atomic nucleus is split? The total number of nuclear particles stays the same, but a surplus of energy is released, nuclear energy. That phenomenon is what we call nuclear fission. In a nuclear reactor, energy from the fission of uranium atoms is used to produce electricity. Uranium is used because it's one of the elements found in a natural state that can split. When the nucleus of a uranium atom is hit by a neutron, it bursts. That fission produces energy in the form of heat and frees other neutrons, which in turn hit other atoms of uranium. This is called a chain reaction. In order to maintain a constant nuclear reaction, a moderator is used to slow down the neutron's pace. The most commonly used moderators are water and heavy water. Heavy water differs from plain water in that it contains one neutron more than ordinary water. Heavy water is used because it's an extremely effective moderator. In another circuit, the coolant, heavy water heated by the nuclear reaction is directed to a thermal exchanger. Here, the heat of the heavy water is transferred to ordinary water, which begins to boil. The steam is then sent to a turbine, coupled with an alternator that, by turning, produces electricity, the same way as in a hydroelectric plant. Although nuclear fission is fairly well controlled, researchers are attempting to use another, much higher performance process to produce electricity: nuclear fusion. Whereas nuclear fission occurs when an atomic nucleus is split, nuclear fusion is the result of the union of two nuclei into a single nucleus. The Sun, for instance, radiates heat to its planets due to the continual nuclear fusion happening at its center. Scientists have not yet managed, in 3 decades of research, to assemble the conditions necessary for controlled nuclear fusion. To obtain nuclear fusion, heavy hydrogen atoms are used, which have 1 and 2 neutrons respectively, whereas ordinary hydrogen has none. These hydrogen atoms are then called deuterium and tritium. The first step toward fusion consists of bringing the deuterium and tritium atoms to a plasma state. Plasma is one of the possible states of matter, as are liquid, solid, and gaseous states. Plasma is a very hot gaseous mass formed when an electrical current passes through it, as in a neon tube. In the plasma, the atomic nuclei and their electrons are separate. Since deuterium and tritium nuclei have the same electrical charge, they tend to repel each other. However, if the plasma is heated electrically to temperatures reaching 100 million degrees, the deuterium and tritium atoms fuse. Their fusion creates a nucleus of helium and a free neutron, while at the same time releasing energy. No known solid matter could withstand such high temperatures. Scientists have therefore considered confining nuclear fusion within a magnetic field. Experimental reactors, the tokamaks, were developed to study the effectiveness of magnetic confinement of this sort. Owing to its highly powerful magnetic fields, the tokamak could eventually contain a fusion reaction. It will not be possible for nuclear fusion to be a source of energy until then. Because they are not electrically charged, the neutrons freed during the fusion of the deuterium and tritium nuclei will be able to evade the magnetic field. The free neutrons will heat up a layer of liquid metal. That heat, once converted into steam, will operate electric turbines, like in today's nuclear fission power stations. Scientists believe that nuclear fusion could be 10 times more effective than nuclear fission. Another advantage is that as a fuel supply source, it is virtually inexhaustible, since both deuterium and tritium can be drawn from water. If we ever managed to control nuclear fusion, our energy problems would be over. The planet holds in its ocean the simplest and most abundant fuel there is: water, magic compound of hydrogen and oxygen. By causing all the hydrogen contained in a single liter of water to fuse, we would obtain as much energy as we would by burning 300 liters of gas. So while waiting for nuclear fusion to become a reality, our power stations produce energy by fission. This creates another problem: radioactive waste. Just as some metals are sensitive to corrosion, living cells in plants, as in our bodies, are sensitive to radioactivity. Excessive exposure to radioactivity can cause burns, but especially certain forms of cancer, such as leukemia. Even more frightening is the fact that radioactivity can provoke mutations. But how can medicine make use of radioactive matter when it is known to be so harmful? Technological advancement has made it possible to make elements radioactive artificially. Such elements are widely used for medical purposes, such as the case of cobalt-60, whose radioactive disintegration releases gamma rays. Since the 1950s, hospitals have been using this type of radioactive radiation to cure cancer. This is possible because the damage caused to the deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA molecules present in each living cell, is more difficult to repair in a cancer cell than in a healthy one. When the gamma rays from the cobalt-60 equipment reach the heart of a cell, they cut the DNA molecules. Scientists currently believe that 2 breaks in the DNA molecule of a cancerous cell are sufficient to prevent it from joining back together. Since the cancer cell's internal mechanism has been disturbed, it can no longer reproduce. If the gamma rays manage to damage large numbers of cancer cells, the disease can be slowed down. Although the healthy cells surrounding the cancerous ones are also sensitive to gamma rays, they appear to be more resistant to them. At each session, a technician outlines the area to be treated on the patient's skin. The body is shielded from the gamma rays with a lead mask. Lead has the property of absorbing gamma rays. Furthermore, to prevent healthy cells from being destroyed by the gamma rays, the power of the radiation is adjusted according to the type of tissue exposed. To minimize radiation on healthy tissue, a tumor is attacked from several angles. This reduces amounts of radiation to healthy tissue while focusing on the targeted cancer tissue. Every year, in over 70 countries, close to 500,000 people receive cobalt-60 radiation treatment. Radioactive substances are used in hospitals for another purpose: to look inside the human body. This is possible through what are called CT techniques. Every bodily organ has specific properties. The brain, as we know, accumulates certain chemical substances. If one of these substances, previously marked by a radioactive isotope, is injected into a patient's bloodstream, it will accumulate in the brain. This applies to all other bodily organs as well. All that needs to be done is to inject into the patient a chemical that will concentrate in the targeted organ. The organ in question then becomes visible owing to a camera that is sensitive to radiation. The camera makes a complete rotation around the patient. During the rotation, the camera can take up to 128 photographs. This information is then transmitted to a computer, which stores the parameter data as well as a 3-dimensional image of the organ under study. Based on these 3-dimensional images, the doctor obtains color images of the organ on a cathode ray screen, viewed from whatever angle he chooses. He can thus locate a tumor, study the distribution of blood in the brain, and possibly even pinpoint a lesion. This method of investigation poses no threat to the patient. The radioactive atoms injected into the body emit only a very weak radiation and are quickly evacuated via the urine and feces. Spectacular pictures, to be sure, but mostly a means to check bodily functions without having to resort to surgery. Medical diagnosis is not the only area that can benefit from nuclear technology. Controlled radioactivity might well be used someday for the preservation of foods. For several years now, tests have been conducted on a new technique to preserve foods: irradiation. This technique consists of exposing the foods to the action of ionizing rays. These rays go through the foods, without leaving a trace of radioactivity. What they do is kill insects, destroy the parasites, and eliminate the microorganisms that cause foods to perish. Irradiation can even prevent the germination of root vegetables. Before you find irradiated produce on your supermarket shelves, perhaps you would like to know a little more about irradiation. Fruits and vegetables that stay fresh for several days. Poultry free of pathogenic bacteria. Foods with less preservatives. That's what radiation can do. For the past 25 years, it has been used to sterilize medical products and instruments. Now it is increasingly used for health and food preservation purposes. In a food radiation center, foodstuffs are put into a room with 2-meter-thick concrete walls. The source of radiation is inside this chamber. Radiation consists of exposing the foods to a radioactive source, such as cobalt-60, which emits gamma rays. When gamma rays reach microorganisms, such as bacteria, they totally disrupt their internal structure. When gamma rays reach bacterial cells, they hit and eject the atomic electrons of the 4 molecules that make up the DNA chain, namely thymine, cytosine, guanine, and adenine. Among other things, this causes the links between the molecules to break. Cut into various sections, the DNA molecules become inoperative, and the bacterium, which can no longer reproduce, finally dies. Gamma rays have a different effect on microorganisms. When they strike water molecules, they convert them into free radicals. Free radicals are fragments of molecules that destroy the cells of neighboring microorganisms. The free radicals found in their natural state in all living organisms are called radiolites when created by exposure to gamma rays. Radiolites have a very short lifespan and are apparently harmless. By destroying undesirable microorganisms, radiation slows down the degradation process of foods and thus prolongs the periods of time they may be preserved. Specific doses are calculated for every type of food to ensure maximum preservation. The maximum dose of radiation is obtained by subjecting the food to radiation of varying lengths of time. Radiation can also affect the structure of foods. For example, if you expose a potato to gamma rays, the DNA molecules responsible for cell division are broken, and this stops the germination process. When foods have undergone radiation, their taste and texture are laboratory tested. A radiated food requires little in the way of preservatives. Also, a number of pathogenic organisms can be eliminated, including salmonella, which contaminates poultry, or trichina, which affects pork. In the human body, such organisms can cause serious illness and even death. Thanks to radiation techniques, the chances of illness and food poisoning can be greatly reduced. Radiated foods can therefore be beneficial both for the public at large and for individuals whose immune system is weak. However, radiation does destroy part of the essential elements in foods, such as the vitamins A, B6, B12, C, and E. But then so do cooking, canning, and freezing, which destroy a number of nutritional elements as well. While the technique remains controversial, there are numerous potential uses for food radiation. When doubts about food radiation have disappeared, chances are that most common foodstuffs will be radiated. Whatever the case, radiated foods will be identified by an international logo. From a scientific point of view, irradiation is now considered a valid means to preserve foods. A number of research groups around the world are of the same opinion. But in the final analysis, you alone must make the choice.